Did you feel bad? Having to stab one of your best friends? I thought about it, but then I decided that remorse will get me nowhere.
He is described as tall and thin, with a white, featureless head, always wearing a black suit with long, tentacle-like arms. According to the legend, he stalks, abducts, and kills children. However, if these children offer another child as a sacrifice, they will be spared. In addition to these terrifying acts, he is also associated with a condition called slender sickness. This occurs when someone comes into close proximity to him, but isn't captured. The sickness brings severe paranoia, nightmares, and nosebleeds, gradually driving the victim insane and turning them into one of his minions who becomes murderous themselves. He is said to lurk in places like parks, playgrounds, and even specific woods known as his dwelling. He is Slender Man, one of the most frightening urban legends to emerge from the internet. I do want to make this very clear. Slenderman is entirely fictional. He does not exist in reality. But today we're going to discuss two individuals who believed in this urban legend so deeply that they actually acted on it. We're delving into the notorious Slenderman Stabbing.
Isn't it legal to stab someone if they try to stab you first? If it's self-defense? In some situations. But do you think that that's what happened here? Oh no, I'm just wondering.
Before we begin, I want to give a quick trigger warning. Today's video will include discussions about schizophrenia. If this is a topic you'd prefer to avoid, feel free to skip this video. I completely understand, and I hope to see you in my next one. Now let's dive into the case. Peyton Leutner was 12 years old at the time of this case. She was born on February 13, 2002 in Wisconsin State, USA, where she lived with her parents, Stacy and Joe Leutner. Peyton was a cheerful and healthy kid with a typical life for a girl her age. She had a perfectly normal, happy childhood. She went to school, played with friends, and had two close friends, forming a little trio with Morgan and Anissa. However, this trio was a recent development. It had mostly been Peyton and Morgan as a best friend duo before that. Morgan Geyser had a more troubled upbringing. Morgan's father suffered from severe schizophrenia, which led to frequent hospitalizations throughout her childhood. This strained their family life, and Morgan's mother, often busy, did her best to give Morgan a good childhood. Despite her mother's efforts to provide a normal and happy life, Morgan frequently had to entertain herself. Around the age of 9 or 10, Morgan Geyser began exploring the internet, where she became fascinated with scary content. She would look up chilling stories, frightening pictures, and paranormal phenomena. She'd then share these creepy tales with her friends at school, who would often be terrified by the stories she told. These types of stories, which can easily give kids nightmares, had a significant impact on her peers. As time went on, Morgan's constant sharing of disturbing stories led to her friends distancing themselves from her. The trauma and fear caused by her stories made them reluctant to spend time with her, resulting in Morgan finding herself without friends. This is how Morgan and Peyton first met. Peyton, being a kind and empathetic girl, noticed Morgan standing alone during break time. Given that Morgan had lost her friends and was isolated, Peyton felt a deep sense of sympathy. Believing that everyone deserves a friend, she then approached Morgan, introduced herself, and the two instantly bonded. From then on, they became best friends. Despite their differences, Morgan was more of a free spirit, whereas Peyton was more of a rule follower. They balanced each other out in complementary ways. Morgan encouraged Peyton to step out of her comfort zone, while Peyton helped keep them both out of trouble. The two were inseparable for the next few years, spending as much time together as possible, having sleepovers, and staying up late laughing and joking. Morgan continued to indulge in her fascination with creepy, scary stories, and she did share them with Peyton a few times. However, by this point, Morgan had learned not to overwhelm Peyton with these stories. Instead, she would show her the spooky drawings she created. Morgan was quite artistic, producing detailed, unsettling images of creepy creatures. Some of her drawings even had disturbing phrases like, "I love killing people," written around them. Despite this, Peyton tried to be supportive and didn't judge Morgan for her interest in horror and creepy content. She understood that everyone has different tastes, though she personally found such things terrifying. Peyton was easily frightened by Morgan's stories and would often lay awake at night, unable to sleep because of the unsettling thoughts they stirred. Despite her fear, she remained friends with Morgan, reluctant to admit her fear or ask Morgan to stop sharing these stories, and so she endured the scary content for a while. Eventually, a third girl, Anissa Wire, joined the duo of Peyton and Morgan. Anissa was the same age as the other two and fit in well with their group. However, adding a third person to a friendship often brings challenges. If you've ever been part of a trio, you know the dynamics can be tricky. One person often feels left out, creating a situation where two people may be closer, leading to feelings of jealousy and conflicts. In this trio, Anissa was the third wheel because she was the newest member, while Peyton and Morgan had been friends since they were young. Anissa seemed to feel a bit jealous, especially of Peyton. She had more in common with Morgan and got along better with her. But since Morgan was already close with Peyton, Anissa felt like an outsider. The existing dynamic between Peyton and Morgan meant that Anissa, despite her similarities to Morgan, couldn't replace Peyton's position as Morgan's best friend. This likely ignited some jealousy within the group. Over time, Anissa and Morgan grew closer, largely because they lived in the same apartment building and took the same bus to and from school together every day, without Peyton. This gave them plenty of opportunities to bond and have conversations just between them. They even discovered that they both had a strong interest in creepy internet horror stories. As a result, Morgan and Anissa began delving deeper into various internet urban legends, eventually coming across Slenderman. Let me be absolutely clear. Slenderman is purely a creation of fiction. He has no basis in reality and does not exist outside of stories. He's a fictional character that was created in 2009 on an online forum called Something Awful. He was invented by Eric Knudsen, who used the username Victor Surge. The character was made for a Photoshop contest where people were asked to create creepy, supernatural images. Most participants just added ghostly figures or eerie eyes to their pictures, but Victor went further. He submitted 2 photos, each with captions that provided a backstory. These captions described the abduction of children by the character named Slender Man. The first picture shows a group of teenagers, and behind them you can see Slender Man with his arms outstretched. The caption for this picture read, "We didn't want to go, we didn't want to kill them, but its persistent silence and outstretched arms horrified and comforted us at the same time. 1983, photographer unknown, presumed dead." The second picture showed a group of much younger kids at the park. The caption for this picture read, "One of 2 recovered photographs from the Sterling City Library blaze. Notable for being taken the day which 14 children vanished, and for what is referred to as the Slender Man." Deformities cited as film defects by officials. Fire at library occurred 1 week later. Actual photograph confiscated as evidence. 1986, photographer Mary Thomas, missing since June 13, 1986. This unique approach by Victor Surge distinguished his entry from the others and led to the widespread expansion of the Slender Man myth. Nowadays, nearly everyone is familiar with Slender Man. People dress up as him for Halloween, and there have been games and follow-on stories made about him, including fan fictions. Practically everything you could imagine has been created about Slender Man. This shows just how widespread and popular this fictional supernatural character has become. Everyone just knows about him. And of course, Morgan and Anissa came across the Slender Man story on the internet and were immediately captivated by it. Morgan in particular was more deeply engrossed in these stories. At the next sleepover, when all three girls were together, Morgan and Anissa told Peyton the story of Slender Man. The way her friends told the story was so convincing that it made Peyton believe it was real. This absolutely terrified Peyton. She was so scared by the idea of Slender Man that she went home and panicked to her mother. Her mother had to calm her down, explaining, "It's just a story. Slender Man isn't real, so there's no need to be afraid. You're safe." Anissa and Morgan's parents knew that they were obsessed with Slender Man. However, they didn't see anything wrong with it. They thought it was similar to being interested in horror movies, a popular genre that many people enjoy. If we were to judge everyone who likes horror, we'd be suspicious of a lot of people. It's common for teens to get into horror. So the parents didn't consider it a problem. Peyton was extremely scared of Slender Man by this point, but Anissa and Morgan kept talking about him almost every time they were together. They were so obsessed with the story, trying to learn everything about it. Peyton was at her wit's end, getting nightmares and having trouble sleeping because the conversation among her friends constantly revolved around horrifying, scary, supernatural stuff she didn't want to hear about. She considered distancing herself from Anissa and Morgan and making new friends, but she didn't want to because she loved them, especially Morgan. Peyton and Morgan had been friends since they were very young, and she didn't want to give up that friendship just because her friend had a strange interest. As she listened to Morgan talk about Slender Man more and more, Peyton realized that Morgan really believed in him. Morgan thought Slender Man actually existed and was stalking, murdering, and abducting children in real life. It was truly an obsession for Morgan and Anissa, and they were completely deluded, believing the urban legend as if it were real. Over time, the relationship between the friends began to change, as you might expect. With Morgan and Anissa sharing a deep, intense interest in Slender Man and living in the same apartment building and taking the same bus to school, they naturally grew closer. So by 2014, while all three girls were still friends, Morgan and Anissa had become much closer, while Peyton started to feel more distant from them, feeling more like the outsider. On May 30th, 2014, Morgan was celebrating her 12th birthday with a sleepover with her two best friends, Anissa and Peyton. It was supposed to be a fun night with just the three of them. Earlier that day, they had enjoyed ice skating, had ice cream, and were looking forward to finishing the day with a movie and a sleepover. They had done this so many times before that it felt like a routine. Watch a movie, have snacks, stay up late laughing and talking. But tonight, things didn't go as planned. As soon as they got back to Morgan's apartment, Morgan suggested they all go to bed right away, which was unusual since they normally stay up late during sleepovers. Peyton assumed Morgan was tired after their busy day of ice skating and other activities, so they just went to Morgan's bedroom and went to sleep. The next morning, Peyton woke up to find that Anissa and Morgan were gone. She got out of bed and started searching the apartment for them. Eventually, she found them on Morgan's computer. They explained that they had woken up early and didn't want to wake her. So they quietly left the room to use the computer while letting her sleep. So, now that all the girls were awake, they had breakfast together. While they were eating, they spoke about what to do for the day. Morgan suggested they go for a walk in the park as the weather was beautiful and they could have some fun outdoors. The girls were all excited about the idea, so Morgan's mother drove them to a park called David's Park. On the morning of May 31st, all three girls arrived at David's Park. They wandered into the woods where Morgan then suggested they play hide and seek. Morgan volunteered to count. She turned around, covered her eyes, and started counting, while Anissa and Peyton ran off into the woods to find hiding spots. Once they were far enough, Anissa turned to Peyton with a plan for a great hiding spot. She told Peyton to lay down on the ground covered with leaves, and she would cover her with more leaves and sticks so that Morgan wouldn't be able to see her. So they did. Peyton laid down on the ground and Anissa then covered her with leaves. Peyton can't see anything now. She could only hear and feel the rustling of leaves and the sound of Anissa running off, presumably to hide. As Peyton lay there, she heard Morgan stop counting and footsteps approaching her, snapping twigs and rustling leaves. Suddenly, Someone jumped on top of her and held her down. Although she was covered with leaves, she could make out that the person pinning her down was Anissa. Anissa had her by the arms, restricting her movement. Peyton struggled to get free, and from the corner of her eye, she saw Morgan reach into her backpack, pull out a knife, and approach her. Morgan then ran over and jumped on top of Peyton, adding to the weight holding her down. Morgan leaned close to Peyton and whispered in her ear, "I'm so sorry." Morgan then proceeded to stab her best friend 19 times as Anissa pinned her down. The knife struck everywhere, her chest, torso, arms, legs. No part was spared. When the brutal attack finally ended, Morgan stepped back, and the two girls stared down at Peyton, who was now drenched in blood and covered in stab wounds. Panic set in. They hurriedly told her, "We'll get help. We'll find someone to help you. It's okay, you're going to be okay." And then they ran off.
The whole time, Peyton was screaming in agony. So we told her we were gonna get help, but we really weren't. We were gonna run and let her pass away.
But Peyton wasn't fooled. She knew they weren't coming back. Realizing that her only chance of survival was to find help on her own, this 12-year-old girl somehow managed to lift herself up and lurch through the dense woods. She clung to trees for support, her vision blurring, her body racked with unimaginable pain, and her blood spilling out at an alarming rate. Her mind must have been singularly focused on one thing: staying alive. Eventually, Peyton stumbled out of the woods and onto a path in the park, where her strength finally gave out and she collapsed. Though still conscious and breathing, she had nothing left to keep herself upright. In what could only be described as a miracle, a cyclist happened to ride by at that very moment. Spotting her on the ground, Peyton managed to call out to him, telling him she'd been stabbed and needed help. The man quickly called for an ambulance.
What's the address of your emergency?
Waukesha County, Lindy. I'm transferring over a caller on Big Bend. At the dead end, just south of Rivera. And he came upon a 12-year-old female. She appears to be stabbed.
She appears to be what?
Stabbed.
Stabbed?
Correct.
Okay.
Are you still there? Yes.
Hi, sir. So are you with this 12-year-old female?
Yeah, she said she's having trouble breathing. She said she was stabbed multiple times.
Stabbed multiple times?
Yeah.
The ambulance arrived quickly, rushing Peyton to the hospital. Despite being stabbed 19 times, only 2 of the wounds were life-threatening. The other 17 were relatively shallow, affecting only skin and muscle, and it's likely that this saved her life. However, the 2 severe wounds required emergency surgery, and one of them came frighteningly close to killing her. This wound, a deep stab to her chest, had grazed her aorta, one of the main arteries that carries blood away from the heart. Had it been pierced, Peyton would have bled out within minutes. In fact, doctors determined that if the wound had been just 1 millimeter deeper, she likely wouldn't have survived. The second major wound was equally serious. A deep stab that penetrated through her diaphragm, cutting into her liver and stomach, causing significant internal bleeding. Emergency surgery was required to address this as well, but miraculously, Peyton survived. After being stitched up, Peyton was moved to a hospital room to begin the long, challenging road to recovery. During the first few days, she was hooked up to various tubes, some to help her breathe, others to help her eat. She couldn't speak because of the tubes in her mouth, so she had to communicate with her mother by writing on a whiteboard. After a few days, the tubes were removed, allowing Peyton to recover more comfortably. Remarkably, after 7 days in the hospital, she was discharged and sent home to continue her recovery. After the attack, Peyton endured severe physical and mental trauma. She frequently experienced breakdowns and nightmares, often needing to sleep with her mother because she couldn't bear to be alone. Peyton became paranoid, struggled to trust anyone, and found it difficult to make friends or engage in social activities. For years, she even slept with scissors under her pillow every night out of fear. There was no mystery about who attacked Peyton. The culprits were her 2 best friends, Morgan Geyser and Anissa Wire. Peyton survived and was able to identify them, but the police already knew who was responsible even before Peyton could speak. 5 hours after the attack, Morgan and Anissa were captured by police around 4.9 miles from where the stabbing occurred. The girls claimed they were heading to meet Slender Man at his residence known as Slender Mansion, located in the Nicollet National Forest, roughly 200 miles from the spot where they were apprehended. The police also discovered the backpack containing the blood-soaked knife used in the attack. Both girls were arrested and taken directly to the police station, where they quickly confessed. Overwhelmed and scared, they didn't try to lie. Their fear led them to spill the truth uncontrollably. They admitted to attempting to kill their friend Peyton, revealing that the motive was a sacrifice to Slender Man. The police, unfamiliar with the Slender Man story, pressed them for details. Morgan and Anissa explained that Slender Man has young followers called proxies who carry out murders on his behalf. According to Anissa, Morgan had suggested they should become proxies, and the only way to prove themselves was to kill Peyton. The act was supposed to grant them a place in Slender Man's imagined mansion in the woods and ensure that he would spare them and their families if they performed the sacrifice. They genuinely believed in his power and thought that the only way to protect themselves was by killing their best friend. The girls laid out their entire plan to the police without holding back. They admitted that this wasn't their first attempt. They had tried to kill Peyton a few times before, but it had failed each time. Their plan had been in the works for a while, initially with Morgan's birthday set as the chosen day. That's why Morgan insisted on going to bed immediately when they returned to her house that night, so they could wait until Peyton was asleep to carry out their plan, which involved ambushing her in the middle of the night, using tape to muffle her screams, and then slashing her throat. However, after Peyton fell asleep, they hesitated, realizing that carrying out the killing in the house would be too messy and difficult to cover up. They then decided to wait until morning and execute the plan in the park, intending to leave the body there and flee. When they set out for the park the next morning, Morgan and Anissa had packed a 5-inch-long kitchen knife in a backpack. Their plan was to kill Peyton in the park's public bathrooms. They intended to knock her out, drag her into a stall, and then stab her to death before fleeing. However, their plan didn't go as expected. One of the girls even tried to hit Peyton to make her unconscious, but it failed, leaving them with an ineffective attack. That's when they told the police about their backup plan, the hide-and-seek game. Anissa had managed to convince Peyton to lie down and cover her eyes, making her an easy target.
Morgan and I decided that we would make an attempt to fulfill the plan at the park. This was around 10 o'clock, I believe. We went to the park. I didn't realize that it was actually going to happen until Morgan lifted up her waistband and showed me the handle of the knife. We were just playing on the playground for a while. After a while, we went into the bathroom. Morgan told me to stab Peyton. I told her that I couldn't do it. She tried getting me to do it again. I told her that I couldn't do it. A while later, we went into the woods, and that's when Morgan asked me whether or not she should do it, and I just wanted it to be over with, so I said, just go berserk, do what you have to do, and Peyton was then hurt. And
so how was she hurt?
Morgan jumped on top of her and stabbed her repeatedly.
And what happened at a certain point, the two of you left?
Yes. Afterwards, I told Peyton to lay down and that she would lose blood slower, pardon my slip up. Then Morgan and I left and ran.
Well, why did you develop the plan to kill?
We developed, okay. I thought I thought that it was just about proving that this fictional character existed. But I have no idea what Morgan's motivations were. I thought it was just about proving that something most people thought wasn't real was.
So this is, and who are you talking about?
The character?
Right.
Slender Man.
All right. Why did, what motivated you to conclude that you had to kill someone in order to follow through with whatever program you had with Slender Man?
It wasn't my idea. Morgan came to me one day telling me that we should prove that Slender Man existed, and I asked her how, and she said we had to kill somebody, and I said okay, because I thought it was just a joke, honestly. I didn't think it was actually gonna happen, but it obviously did.
During their police interviews, Morgan and Anissa repeatedly insisted that they didn't want to kill Peyton but felt compelled to do so. They were convinced that if they didn't carry out the sacrifice, Slenderman would come after them. They believed he was already stalking them, watching their every move, and that if they failed to act, he would soon harm them or their families. The urgency to sacrifice someone quickly consumed them. When the police asked if they understood the consequences of killing their best friend, the girls explained that they were far more terrified of Slenderman's wrath than of facing prison time. In their minds, the fear of being kidnapped and killed by Slenderman outweighed the fear of imprisonment. Through these interviews, the police concluded that Morgan was the brain behind the attack, with Anissa following along. They believed that Anissa likely would never have committed such an act if she hadn't met Morgan. Morgan was seen as the driving force, the one who persuaded Anissa to participate. Morgan's behavior during the interviews was unsettling. At one point, when left alone in the room, she stood up and started dancing, performing a strange little tap dance. It was a bizarre reaction for someone being accused of attempting to murder their best friend. But it was the things Morgan said during her interviews that were truly chilling.
Did you feel bad? Having to stab one of your best friends? I thought about it, but then I decided that remorse will get me nowhere. It's easier to live without regrets if you can just decide that you don't want to feel. So don't you? Don't do it. Just when don't you rather not feel things if you don't? It's a negative emotion. What's the point of feeling it? So you don't have to do it again, or stay away from it, or make different choices. All right. I can't do it again. Of course not. For if something's bad, then you don't do it anymore. Mm-hmm. Can I ask you a question? Yes. Where's Bella's body now? Bella's at the hospital. Okay. I thought it was still out there. The crime scene. Did you think that she died? Yeah. She is alive. Okay. How does that make you feel? It makes me feel kind of happy. Kind of worried that, like, I'm just scared all around. What are you worried about? I know she'll never trust me again unless she eats my guts. How many stab wounds did they find? 19. Okay. Well, you counted 17. Was she counting out loud as she was doing it? No, she was counting in her head, I think.
As part of their investigation, the police seized the girls' home computers to find evidence. On Anissa's computer, they didn't discover much of interest, reinforcing the idea that Morgan was the main planner. However, Morgan's computer history revealed some significant clues. Among several suspicious searches, one stood out. Morgan had searched for how to get away with murdering someone. They also found a sketchbook in Morgan's school locker filled with disturbing drawings of Slender Man. These included graphic depictions of the creature killing children. This was unsettling, especially considering Morgan was only 12 years old. Even though the confessions provided enough evidence to prosecute, these additional findings further supported their case. When it came time to take this case to trial, Both of these 12-year-old girls were to be tried as adults, which raises some serious questions. Now, I'm not defending their actions in any way. What they did was horrifying, no doubt about it. But aren't there rules for a reason? We try kids as kids because they're still children, and that's an important distinction. This is particularly concerning in Anissa's case, where even the police acknowledged that she was more of a follower, simply going along with whatever Morgan told her to do. They believed that Anissa wouldn't have acted this way if she had never met Morgan. Moreover, during the court process, both girls underwent psychiatric evaluations and were found to be mentally ill. Morgan was diagnosed with early-onset childhood schizophrenia. She revealed that she had experienced visual and auditory hallucinations since early childhood. These hallucinations often involved figures she believed to be ghosts, as well as vivid images like colors melting down walls. One of her recurring hallucinations was of a figure she called It, which she described as having a body the color of smoke and ink. She often saw It standing behind her in mirrors or lurking around corners. This was the driving force behind her belief that Slenderman posed a real threat to her. Both Anissa and Morgan decided to plead guilty to the charges against them. Throughout the entire case, they were cooperative, confessing to everything. Anissa was sentenced to 25 years to life in a psychiatric facility, while Morgan received a sentence of 40 years to life in a psychiatric unit. At a March 10, 2021 hearing, 19-year-old Anissa expressed deep remorse for the pain she caused to Peyton and her community, stating that she no longer hated herself after extensive therapy. On July 1, 2021, a judge ordered her release from the Winnebago Mental Health Institute, with supervision by state officials until she turns 37. Anissa was released on September 13, 2021, under conditions including 24-hour GPS monitoring, which was lifted in September 2023. She remains under strict supervision, including restricted internet use, mandatory psychiatric medication, and regular counseling while living with her father. In 2020, an appeals court denied Morgan's request to be retried as a juvenile. Her attorney argued for a lesser charge and claimed her statements to investigators were made before being read her rights. The Wisconsin Supreme Court declined to review the case in 2021. In January 2024, Geyser petitioned for release, but a judge denied it in April 2024. And so the chilling saga of the Slenderman Stabbing draws to a close, a haunting reminder of how the dark side of the internet can sometimes spill over into reality, twisting young minds in terrifying ways. As we reflect on the tragic consequences of blurred lines between fiction and belief, let's not forget the resilience of those who survive the unthinkable. Until next time, stay curious, stay cautious, and sweet night.